This is probably the most asked question on this channel. What should I be looking for in an interface? And generally, there's no real answer to that question because I don't know you, and there's so many factors that go into this decision. So then, let's take a look at those factors and see if any of this can help you out. I don't want anyone left behind here, so let's clear the air with some of the terms I'm going to be using in this video. For starters, a preamp is basically the device that you plug your XLR microphone into, which raises the signal to something that is workable. Now, all microphones take your voice and turn it into that electrical signal, but it isn't exactly screaming loud, so the preamp just helps with that. As for EIN, that is referencing self-noise, meaning the inherent noise that an interface will impart on your signal when you raise that gain up. As for anything else, I think I can explain it on the fly, so let's get to it. Now, this should be very obvious, but what you plan on doing with your interface should be the primary consideration when you're picking one out, because I do see a lot of people trying to fit a square peg into a round hole oh so often.
It goes in the square hole.
Now, if you're dead set on something like this, a podcasting board, well, your options might be limited to a couple. Or if you're a streamer and you need a very specific setup, ditto. But also, if you're a musician, perhaps you want to be looking at something other than a podcasting mixer. Outside of those specific use cases, though, it gets even more straightforward when you're picking out your interface. This one is one of the hardest things for people to wrap their head around when buying an interface for the first time. Outside of those prior use cases we were talking about, there is little difference between interfaces within their price categories. There's the entry-level interface, basically from about $140 up to about $250. From $250 to about $500 is the next set of interfaces, and then you go from $500 to about $1,000 next. Now, within those price groupings, you're going to see very little differences between the interfaces for sale. Sure, this one offers a button to give it a slightly airy sound on your voice, or this one lets you plug in a MIDI device. Ooh! But the difference between one interface that's $150 and another is generally going to be pretty limited. Now, there is one great leveler within these price points, however, and that is inputs or the number of inputs. This will dramatically change the quality of the internals around the preamps and sometimes the preamps themselves. So, for example, a $149 single input interface is going to be much better than a 4-input interface at the same price. And that's because the actual preamps on those inputs are where a lot of the money is going. Outside of that, though, the only real difference will be what I consider the perks when comparing interfaces with similar inputs, like the aforementioned MIDI or perhaps extra headphone outs, or sometimes even better metering on the unit. But I can say one thing. Software does not and should not have any impact on the price of most interfaces. Now, I do say most, as there are some niche examples like streaming specific or even podcasting specific units, but otherwise, not really. At one time, the ability to record multi-track was locked behind tiers, but not really anymore. ASIO drivers tend to be the standard these days. As we move beyond $250, though, something has changed recently. More actual features have been popping up like DSP or digital signal processing. There are things like EQ, compression, and such that are actually done on the interface so it doesn't tax your computer. Again, this is a relatively new thing at this price point as it was generally only available on the Apollos of this world and also historically carried a much heavier price tag. I think this is stuff that is going to continue to be integrated into cheaper stuff year over year, but with varying degrees of success. Again, though, even with those kinds of things, I would still consider this stuff under perks instead of features. They are great, but fundamentally do not or should not impact the price of the interface. As for the $500 to $1,000 interface, this is where you really start to see the expanding features that can really impact price. Things like ADAT, higher USB speeds, or even Thunderbolt connectivity. This is also where you start to get into the higher end of podcasting interfaces like what Rode has and what Mackie's come up with, where the DSP isn't software controlled, it's actually controlled on the unit. You also see things like touchscreen UI. All very exciting stuff, and to be honest, this is where you really start to see the actual usable features that might be worth being patient and saving your money for. As for the stuff on the other side of $1,000, well, this is the point where you start seeing things get more modular, meaning preamps are separate units, converters are separate units, and even things like the Apollo series that offers all the aforementioned features previous, but also full-blown DSP. All things that are amazing and worth saving up for, but maybe not necessarily for your first podcast. Okay, time to get spicy, and I can hear you yelling at the computer just from the title page. I know specs matter, but sub $500, only a couple really come into play. And that is not really the fault of anyone but the companies themselves. You see, in a lot of cheaper interfaces, companies like to hide specs or just don't consider them important enough for you to know. But the two that actually matter are EIN and gain range. Both are linked, but separate. EIN, as I told you earlier, is basically the noise level that the interface imparts on the signal. The lower, the better. And generally, it's rather easy to get an interface at around neg 127 dBA weighted, if not lower. To add to that, gain ranges have also come a long way in the past few years. I would argue that a minimum of 65 dB of gain is expected these days, and even the entry-level units are boasting numbers well above that. And I will reiterate that all the specs beyond those two are still important. However, are you going to find any differences brand to brand in the same price bracket that are going to impact performance in any real-world way with those other specs? No. Okay, more yelling at the screen. This one is more for the lower tiered stuff, but let me be very clear. If you are buying an interface under $1,000, very few people are going to be able to hear the tonal differences between interfaces within similar price points. Now, this doesn't account for noise. Yes, that makes a difference interface to interface, though that stuff is easily filtered out. But how a mic sounds from one $500 interface to the next is a ridiculous thing to compare. And that is because of one single fact. All interfaces under $1,000, or you could even stretch that to $2,000, are pretty much built for clarity, meaning they're all trying for the exact same sound, and a lot of them within similar price points are using identical internal components for things like preamps and converters. The point is, doing A/B tests for sound is kind of a lesson in futility. Save your time. Now, as you get to much higher price points, you may notice this changes as you get preamps that offer character. If you're watching this video, though, it's a good bet that that isn't an issue you're going to face for the next little while. If you want to see more on character preamps, though, let me know down below. So then, what does all this gobbledygook mean if you're looking to buy an interface? Well, it means once you know what your use case is and your price point, your decisions become less and less important. So start there. If you only have $300, we'll find an interface with the amount of inputs you need, then piece together which add-ons are going to benefit you the most, and voila, you're going to have your decision. Things like MIDI can be the deal breaker for you, or if you don't need MIDI, that can also be a deal breaker for you. Do you need monitor outs? Well, again, all these little decisions will end up narrowing down your decision. And as you climb the stacks, those decisions just get a bit more involved. But realistically, if you follow the same pattern, you can make your decision pretty quick. Do you want more physical controls than software? Well, there's your first call. Do you need mix minus or perhaps Bluetooth? As for the added stuff, you really need to be honest with yourself when you're getting hooked in by marketing. All those add-ons might be inflating the price or shrinking the internal qualities. Think of an interface like the SSL lineup, which I'm using right now, the SSL2 Plus. They're all bare bones, but these bones are fantastic. That's a weird thing to say on a video like this, isn't it? Anyways, I hope this was helpful. Let me know down below if this cleared the air or is it just clear as mud for you. Cheers, and thanks for watching.